The birth of Solomon. Then David comforted Bathsheba his wife and went in to her and lay with her. So she conceived and bore a son, and he called him Solomon. Now the Lord loved him, and he sent word by the hand of Nathan the prophet. So he called him Jedidiah, because of the Lord. The capture of Rabbah. Now Job fought against Rabbah of the sons of Ammon and took the royal city. And Job sent messengers to David and said, I fought against Rabbah, and I took the city's water supply. Now gather the rest of the people together and encamp against the city and take it. Or I will take the city and it will be named after me. So David gathered all the people together and went to Rabbah, fought against it, and took it. Then he took the crown of Melchol their king from his head. Its weight was a talent of gold, with precious stones. And it was set on David's head. Also he brought out the spoil of the city in great abundance. And leading out the people who were in it, he put them to work with saws and iron threshing machines and made them work as brickmakers. He did the same to all the cities of the sons of Ammon. Then David and all the people returned to Jerusalem. Amnon and Tamar. And it came to pass that Absalom the son of David had a very lovely sister, whose name was Tamar. Amnon the son of David loved her. Amnon was so lovesick over his sister Tamar that he became ill, for she was a virgin and also aloof. It was nearly impossible, in the eyes of Amnon, for him to gain her affection. But Amnon had a companion whose name was Jonadab the son of Shimeah, David's brother. Now Jonadab was a very clever man. And he said to him, What is the matter with you, son of the king? Why are you becoming weaker day after day? Will you not tell me? Amnon said to him, I am in love with Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister. So Jonadab said to him, Lie down on your bed and pretend to be ill. And when your father comes to see you, say to him, Please let my sister Tamar come and give me food, and prepare the food in my sight, so that I may see it and eat it from her hand. Then Amnon lay down and pretended to be ill. And when the king came to see him, Amnon said to the king, Please let Tamar my sister come and make a couple of cakes for me in my sight, so that I may eat from her hand. And David sent home to Tamar, saying, Go to your brother Amnon's house and prepare food for him. So Tamar went to her brother Amnon's house, and he was lying down. Then she took flour and kneaded it, made cakes in his sight, and baked the cakes. And she took the pan and placed them before him, but he refused to eat. Then Amnon said, Have everyone go out from me. And they all went out from him. Then Amnon said to Tamar, Bring the food into the inner chamber, so that I may eat from your hand. And Tamar took the cakes she had made and brought them to Amnon her brother in the bedroom. Now when she had brought them for him to eat, he took hold of her and said to her, Come, lie with me, my sister. And she answered him, No, my brother, do not shame me, because it is not done this way in Israel. Do not do this foolishness. And how could I bear my disgrace? As for you, you would be like one of the fools in Israel. Now therefore, please speak to the king, for he will not withhold me from you. However, Amnon would not heed her voice, and since he was stronger than she, he violated her and lay with her. Then Amnon hated her exceedingly, so much so that the intense hatred he bore against her was greater than the love with which he at first loved her. And Amnon said to her, "Get up and get out." But Tamar said to him, "No, my brother. Because the hateful malice in your casting me out is far worse than the first thing you did to me." But Amnon would not listen to her. Then he called the servant he had put in charge of his house and said, "Here, take her away from me, and bolt the door behind her." At the time, she wore a robe that reached to her wrists, for the daughters of the king who were virgins wore such apparel. And his servant put her out and bolted the door behind her. Then Tamar put ashes on her head. She tore the special robe she was wearing and then laid her hands on her head and went on her way, crying bitterly. And Absalom her brother said to her, "Has Amnon your brother been with you? Now then, my sister, keep quiet. Because he is your brother, do not put it into your heart to speak about this." So Tamar lived her life as a widow in her brother Absalom's house. But when King David heard all these things, he was very angry. But he did not grieve the spirit of his son Amnon, because he loved him, for he was his firstborn. However, Absalom said nothing to his brother Amnon, neither good nor bad. For Absalom hated Amnon because he had violated his sister Tamar. Notes form the previous page. 11:22-25 Joab sends a messenger to tell David his progress in battle. Fearing David's anger, Joab instructs the man to hold back the fact that Uriah has been killed until the end of the report. Joab is correct in his suspicions. 11:26-27 Hearing of the death of her husband, Bathsheba mourns. Following the mourning period, David takes her as his wife and she gives birth to a son. It is clear David's actions were evil in God's sight. 12:1-6 It is the Lord himself who sends Nathan the prophet to rebuke David for his sins of adultery and murder. David listens to Nathan's parable and then pronounces the sentence on his own head. 12:7-14 Nathan then prophesies to David, "You are the man in the parable. There will be a twofold punishment, warfare from without all the rest of David's days, and rebellion from within. Additionally, the child born to Bathsheba will die." 12:15-23 The child falls ill and dies after 7 days. During the illness, David fasts and lies upon the ground, entreating God to spare the child, v. 22. Once the child dies, David washes and clothes himself properly and goes into the house of the Lord to worship. David has confounded the elders of Israel by reversing the usual customs of mourning. Out of his contrition for these sins comes David's greatest psalm of repentance, Ps 50, which is recited daily in Orthodox devotional practice. 12:24-25 David comforts Bathsheba, who then conceives another child, Solomon, also called Jedediah, beloved of Yahweh. This name is used only here. 12:26-28 Joab has taken the capital city of the Ammonites, Rabbah, modern Ammon, Jordan. But it is a token capture. David is invited to go forth and take it in person, and does so. He takes the crown of Melkol, the Ammonite god, as part of the spoils, and puts the Ammonites under forced labor. 13:1 Nathan's prophecy of strife and struggle in David's house, 12:10, begins to unfold. With incest, fratricide, and rebellion, David's family and the kingdom will be afflicted for the rest of his days and beyond because of his sins of adultery and murder. The unholy conduct of leaders, as well as of parents, produces unholiness in the nation or the family. The sins of a father or mother can thus be visited upon their descendants. For those in spiritual leadership, this can be the case for their spiritual children, see 1 Ti 3, Rev 2:18 ff. 13:1-6 God's punishment of David for his sins, 12:7, now begins to unfold. David's son Amnon falls in love with his half-sister Tamar. She is the full sister of Absalom. Jonadab, their cousin, advises Amnon to pretend to be ill in order to have Tamar come and cook for him. Absalom slays Amnon. It came about after 2 years passed by, to the day, they were shearing sheep for Absalom in Baal-Hazor, near Ephraim. Absalom invited all the king's sons. Then Absalom came to the king and said, "See, your servant has sheep shearers, let the king and his servants go with your servant." But the king said to Absalom, "No, my son. Let us not all go at once, and become burdensome to you." Absalom persisted, but he would not go. Instead he blessed him. Then Absalom said, "Well then, please let my brother Amnon go with us." And the king said to him, "Why should he go with you?" But Absalom persisted, so the king sent Amnon and all his sons with him. Absalom made a banquet like the banquet of the king. Now Absalom had commanded his servants, saying, "Take notice, when Amnon's heart is merry with wine, and when I say to you, strike Amnon and kill him, do not be afraid in any way, because I will give the command to you. Be courageous and valiant." So the servants of Absalom did to Amnon as Absalom had commanded. Then all the king's sons jumped up and each mounted his mule and fled. While they were yet on the way, news came to David, saying, "Absalom has killed all the king's sons. Not one of them is left." So the king arose and tore his garments and lay on the ground, and all his servants stood by with their clothes torn. Then Jonadab the son of Shimeah, David's brother, spoke up and said, "Let not my lord the king suppose the servants killed all the young men, the king's sons, for only Amnon is dead. For by the command of Absalom this has been determined from the day Amnon violated his sister Tamar. Now therefore, let my lord the king not take the thing to heart, thinking that all the king's sons are dead. Only Amnon is dead." Then Absalom escaped. And the servant keeping watch looked up and saw many people coming down the road from the mountainside behind him. The watchman came and told the king and said, "I saw men on the road of Araunah coming from the direction of the mountain." And Jonadab said to the king, "Look, the king's sons are coming. It is as your servant said." As he finished speaking, the king's sons arrived and wept aloud. And the king and all his servants wept very bitterly. But Absalom escaped and went to Talmai the son of Ammihud, king of Geshur, in the land of Maked. King David mourned for his son every day. So Absalom fled and escaped to Geshur. He stayed there 3 years. And the motivation of the king to seek out Absalom ceased, for he was consoled and at peace. Concerning the death of Amnon, Absalom comes back to Jerusalem. Joab the son of Zeruiah perceived that the king's heart was inclined toward Absalom. So Joab sent to Tekoa and took from there a wise woman. He said to her, "Now mourn, and put on apparel for mourning." Do not anoint yourself with olive oil, and be like a woman who is mourning for the dead a long time. Then go to the king and repeat the words I give you. So Job put the words in her mouth. And as the woman of Tekoa spoke to the king, she put her face to the ground and prostrated herself and said, Help me, O king, help me. Then the king said to her, What troubles you? And she answered, Indeed I am a widow. My husband is dead. Now your handmaid had 2 sons, and the 2 fought with each other in the field, and there was no one to part them, but the one struck his brother and killed him. And now the whole family has risen up against your handmaid and said, Deliver him who struck his brother, so we may execute him for the life of his brother whom he killed. We will destroy your heir as well. So they will extinguish my ember that is left, and leave neither name nor remnant on the earth. To my husband. Then the king said, Go in peace to your house, and I will give orders concerning you. And the woman of Tekoa said to the king, My lord king, let the iniquity be on me and on my father's house. Let the king and his throne be guiltless. So the king said, Who said this to you? Bring him to me, and he will no longer have influence over you. Then she said, Indeed, remember, O king, let the Lord God prevail lest the blood of my kinsmen be utterly destroyed. Let not one of them by any means take away my son. And he said, As the Lord lives, not one hair of your son shall fall to the ground. Therefore the woman said, May your handmaid speak another word to my lord the king. And he said, Speak. So the woman responded, Why do you sometimes consider such a thing against the people of God? Truly, this message comes from the mouth of the king as an error, for the king does not bring back his son from being banished. For as we will surely die and be spilled on the ground like water that cannot be gathered together on its own, so too God shall take away life, even as he is taking into account the ones being banished from him. Now I come to speak this message to my lord the king, so the people may see me and say that your handmaid indeed spoke to the king, if somehow the king will fulfill the request of his handmaid. For the king will hear and deliver his handmaid from the hand of the man who seeks to cast me and my son from the inheritance of God. And the woman said, May the word of my lord the king be as an offering. For as an angel of the Lord, thus does my lord and king hear the good and the evil, and the Lord your God will be with you. Then the king answered and said to the woman, Hide nothing from me that I ask of you. And the woman said, Let my lord the king speak. So the king said, Is not the hand of Job in all this with you? And the woman said to the king, O my lord the king, as your soul lives, there is no turning to the right hand or to the left from any of the words my lord the king speaks. Your servant Job commanded me, putting all these words in the mouth of your handmaid. Your servant Job did this to bring about this change of affairs, but my Lord is wise according to the wisdom of an angel of God, and knows everything on the earth. And the king said to Job, All right, I have done this request of yours for you. Go and bring back the young man Absalom. Then Job fell to the ground on his face and bowed himself and blessed the king. And Job said, Today your servant knows that I have found favor in your sight, my lord king, because the king has fulfilled his servant's request. So Job arose and went to Geshur and brought Absalom to Jerusalem. And the king said, Let him return to his own house, but do not let him see my face. So Absalom returned to his own house but did not see the king's face. Notes from the previous page. 13:7-14 Tamar refuses Amnon's advances, although she suggests that marriage would be possible, should he ask the king. Instead, he rapes her. 13:15 Completely revolted by his own deeds, Amnon sends Tamar away. 13:18-19 The variegated robe was worn by virgins. It is the same type of robe as described in PS 44:13-14, a psalm typifying the Virgin Mary. Tamar observes the mourning tradition for the loss of her virginity by placing ashes on her head and rending the garment. Absalom cautions her to remain quiet as he shelters her in his house. 13:21-29 Although David is grieved by his son's action, he does nothing. Amnon is the heir. Absalom bides his time, seeking to avenge his sister's rape. His vengeance takes place after 2 years at sheep shearing, c. 1 kg 25:2-4. Amnon is killed and all his brethren flee. 13:33 The first reports to David have him believing that Absalom has killed all of his sons. Interestingly, it is Jonadab, the cousin who had helped Amnon in his plot to seduce Tamar, who tells the king that only Amnon is dead. 13:34-36 Absalom flees with a band of men, while the sons of David return to Jerusalem. And a general mourning takes place for Amnon. 13:37-39 Geshur is the home of Absalom's mother. He stays there 3 years until the king's grief over Amnon has abated. 14:1-3 Job is aware the king has softened in his heart toward Absalom. He sends a woman of Tekoa to act the part of a widow before David to effect a reconciliation between the king and his son. 14:4-17 The woman's story of a blood feud between her sons parallels David's, see Numbers 35:19-21 Read the law of blood revenge. She presses the king to absolve this blood feud, which he does, indicative of the king's power as judge. Absalom reconciles with his father. Now in all Israel there was no one praised as much as Absalom. From the sole of his foot to the crown of his head, there was no blemish in him. And when he cut the hair of his head at the beginning of every year he cut it because it was heavy on him. He weighed the hair of his head at 200 shekels according to the king's standard. To Absalom were born 3 sons, and 1 daughter whose name was Tamar. She was a woman of beautiful appearance, and she became the wife of Rehoboam, son of Solomon, and she bore to him Abijah. Absalom dwelt for 2 full years in Jerusalem, but did not see the king's face. Therefore Absalom requested that Job send him to the king, but he would not come to him. And when he sent again the second time, he would not come. So Absalom said to his servants, See, a portion of Job's field is near mine, and he has barley there. Go and set it on fire. So Absalom's servants set it on fire. Then Job's servants went to him with their clothes torn and said, Absalom's servants set your portion on fire. Then Job arose and came to Absalom's house and said to him, Why did your servants set my portion on fire? And Absalom answered Job, Look, I sent to you saying, Come here, so I may send you to the king to say, Why have I come from Geshur? It would be better for me to be there still. Now, therefore, I have not seen the king's face, but if there is iniquity in me, let him execute me. So Joab went to the king and told him. And he called for Absalom, and he came to the king and bowed and fell on his face to the ground before the king. Then the king kissed Absalom. The treason of Absalom. After this Absalom provided himself with chariots and horses and 50 men to run before him. Now Absalom would rise early and stand beside the entrance to the gate. So it was that whenever anyone who had a lawsuit came to the king for a decision, Absalom would call to him and say, "What city are you from?" And the man would say, "Your servant is from such and such a tribe of Israel." Then Absalom would say to him, "Look, your case is good and right, but there is no one to grant you a hearing before the king." And Absalom said, "Who will appoint me as judge in the land, so everyone who has any dispute or cause will come to me? I will give him justice." And so it was, when anyone came near to him to bow down in respect, he would put out his hand and take him and kiss him. Absalom acted in this manner toward all Israelites who came to the king for judgment. Absalom won over the hearts of the men of Israel. 4 years later Absalom said to his father, "I am going to Hebron to fulfill the vow I made to the Lord. For your servant took a vow while I dwelt at Geshur in Syria, saying, If the Lord brings me back to Jerusalem, then I will serve the Lord." And the king said to him, "Go in peace." So he arose and went to Hebron. Then Absalom sent spies throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, "As soon as you hear the sound of the trumpet, then you shall say, Absalom reigns as king in Hebron." And Absalom invited 200 men who went with him from Jerusalem. They went along innocently and knew nothing in particular. Then Absalom sent for and called Ahithophel the Gilonite, David's counselor, from his city, from Gilo, where he was offering sacrifices. And the conspiracy grew strong, for there were many people who went with Absalom. David flees Jerusalem. Now a messenger came to David, saying, "The hearts of the men of Israel are following Absalom." So David said to all his servants who were with him at Jerusalem, "Arise, and let us flee. There is no refuge for us before Absalom. Make haste to depart, so he does not drive us out and bring disaster upon us and strike the city with the edge of the sword." And the king's servants said to the king, "We are your servants, ready to do whatever our lord the king commands." Then the king went out on foot with all his household. But the king left 10 women of his concubines to guard the house. And the king went out with all his people on foot, and lodged in a distant house. Then all his servants passed before him, even the Cherethites and all the Pelethites, and they stayed among the olive trees in the desert. All the people walked near him with his cord, all the strong men, and all the 600 men of the army present by his side. And all the Cherethites and all the Pelethites and all the Gathites totaled 600 men who followed him from Gath on foot, who went ahead of the king. Then the king said to Ittai the Gathite, "Why do you also travel with us? Return and remain with the king, for you are a foreigner and an exile from your own place. In fact, you came only yesterday. Should I move you with us and cause you to flee from your place? You left yesterday. Shall I make you sojourn with us today as well? For indeed I will go wherever I wish to go. So return, and take your brethren back with you. May the Lord treat you with mercy and truth." And Ittai answered the king and said, "As the Lord lives, and as my lord the king lives." Wherever my lord the king goes, to death or to life, your servant will be there as well. So the king said to Ittai, Go and cross over with me. Then Ittai the Gathite and all his men and all the crowd who were with him crossed over. And all the country wept with a loud voice. And all the people crossed over the brook Kidron. The king himself crossed over the brook Kidron, and all the people crossed over toward the way of the desert. And there was Zadok and all the Levites with him, bearing the ark of the covenant of the Lord from Bethel. And they set down the ark of God, and Abiathar went up until all the people finished crossing over from the city. Then the king said to Zadok, Carry the ark of God back into the city. If I find favor in the eyes of the Lord, he will bring me back and show me both it and its majesty. But if he says thus, I have no delight in you, behold, here I am. Let him do to me as seems good to him. The king also said to Zadok the priest, Look, return to the city in peace along with your 2 sons, Ahimaaz your son, and Jonathan the son of Abiathar. Take notice, I will continue to wait in Araboth, in the plains of the desert, until word comes from you to let me know. Therefore Zadok and Abiathar carried the ark back to Jerusalem, and they remained there. So David went up by the ascent of the Mount of Olives and wept as he went up. His head was covered and he went up barefoot. And of the people with him, each of the men covered his head and went up, weeping as they went. Then someone told David, saying, Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom. And David said, Lord, my God, defeat the counsel of Ahithophel. Now it happened, when David came to the top of the mountain, where he worshipped God, Hushai the Archite, David's companion, was coming to meet him with his robe torn and dust on his head. David said to him, If you go on with me, then you will become a burden to me. But if you return to the city and say to Absalom, Your brothers crossed over, and the king your father crossed over behind me. Now I am your servant, O king, let me live. As I was previously the servant of your father, so I will now be your servant. So reject the counsel of Ahithophel for me. Indeed, Zadok and Abiathar the priests will be there, so whatever you hear from the king's house, tell the priests. Indeed Zadok and Abiathar have their 2 sons there with them, Ahimaaz, Zadok's son, and Jonathan, Abiathar's son. By them you shall send me everything you hear. So Hushai, David's companion, went into the city. And Absalom entered Jerusalem. Notes from the previous page. 14:18-20 David is suspicious that Joab is somehow involved in her telling the tale. 14:21-24 Absalom is recalled from his exile by David through Joab, but not allowed to live in the palace or see the king's face. 14:25-27 Absalom is described as handsome, with a full head of long hair, which he had cut every year. Absalom's daughter, Tamar, is named here, unusual in Hebrew genealogies, because she will marry Rehoboam, her cousin, the son of Solomon and future king. 14:28-33 Absalom resents his restrictions, unable to obtain an audience with his father, the king after 2 years. Joab even refuses to come at his request until Absalom has Joab's barley field set on fire to force his presence. At last, Absalom is called to his father's court, where he does obeisance to him and is kissed by the king, a sign of reconciliation. 15:1-6 Absalom plays on the disaffection of those seeking judgment from the king who could get no audience. The implication is that David has begun to neglect his duties as judge. 15:7-12 After 4 years, the LXX has 40, Absalom is ready for open revolt. He uses the excuse of having made a vow that needs to be fulfilled and goes to Hebron. The paying or fulfilling of vows was looked upon as a sacred obligation. Thus, David does not stand in his son's way. The irony is, Absalom claims that this vow had been made in hope of his restoration to Jerusalem. 15:13-16 The messenger's news, although perhaps exaggerated, disturbs David enough to cause him to flee the city. The departure is described in great detail. 10 concubines, v. 16, are left behind, c. 16:21. 15:18 A review of the foreign troops loyal to David, c. 8:18, 1 Kings 30:14. David met Bathsheba. When David was a little past the top of the mountain, there was Ziba the servant of Mephibosheth, who met him with a couple of saddled donkeys. And on them were 200 loaves of bread, 100 clusters of raisins, 100 dates, and a skin of wine. And the king said to Ziba, "Why do you have these?" So Ziba said, "The donkeys are for the king's household to ride on, the bread and dates for the young men to eat, and the wine for those who are faint in the desert from lack of drink." Then the king said, "And where is your master's son?" And Ziba said to the king, "He is staying in Jerusalem, for he said, 'Today the house of Israel will restore my father's kingdom to me.'" So the king said to Ziba, "Here, all that belongs to Mephibosheth is yours." And Ziba bowed and said, "May I find favor in your eyes, Lord, my king."